Every smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity. And make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste, the therapist. Let's go.
Hi. All right. So hi, beautiful people. If you are watching me on the replay, thank you so much for watching me. Sorry, I got to fix my webcam. It feels weird. Okay. Thank you so much for watching me. I appreciate you. If you've never been into this live stream before, my name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. I come on, I talk to people that are doing things to empower the lives of others by sharing their story. And I've been podcasting since 2018. So this is actually a podcast. What I decided to do when the pandemic started was bring the podcast to a video platform so that people can have something to kind of look forward to 5 days a week. So this is what the podcast looks like. You can find it streaming on all podcasting platforms. I will be celebrating on Friday. I reached 100,000 downloads last week. And so I want to have like a little online Zoom celebration. So there's going to be games, giveaways, and there's going to be music. So I'm so excited about like reaching this milestone because when I started, I honestly didn't know, where the podcast would lead. But I've been able to, really speak to so many amazing people and learn a lot of amazing things about people. And a lot of people have found a lot of healing, even though my podcast is not a replacement for therapy. I do understand that therapy is not always accessible for people, and mental health treatment is not always, it doesn't work the way it's set up, may not work. And so people have found other modalities kind of through this podcast of like really thinking about what that process looks like, because it's not linear. It can be all over the place. And I think we don't understand that. So that's why I kind of started this podcast, and I'm like excited I did. So I have a special guest. I always have a special guest that's going to come on and grace the stage. I'm going to add him to the stream right now. Let me see. And I'm going to have him introduce himself to you guys. Hello, can you introduce yourself to my audience?
Yes, how you doing? My name is Keith Mascolll. I am an actor, producer, mental health advocate, sneakerhead, and the co-founder of, or I should say founder of the Triggered Project.
That's pretty dope. Now, I knew about the other stuff. I didn't know you was a sneakerhead. You had to throw that in there. Is that like an addiction that you have?
I would say I'm a former addict. No question. And actually, that sneakerhead stuff is important because it has something to do with my healing as well. So that's why I make sure we talk about it, because it's always been something that I've been into and things like that. And I'm actually creating a project around sneaker culture and healing. So
that's dope. Is it a particular type of sneaker, or it just doesn't matter? It's the style that you like?
I mean, I've always been a Nike guy.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, even though I have a pair of some Adidas and some other stuff, but I've always been a Nike guy. So, some Jordans and basketball shoes, being an athlete and things like that. So, but yeah, anybody who knows me knows, I've been a Nike guy for a long time.
So one of the reasons why I brought Keith on, I heard his podcast. So he has a podcast, him and his wife, called Living a Triggered Life. Yeah. Living a Triggered Life. And I was blown away by the transparency, by like all the marks that you hit, the things that you are planning on kind of bringing up in the podcast. And so I wanted him to come on so he can kind of talk about like what that means. Now, the project that even before the podcast started, because the podcast is new, you've been doing this work before the podcast. Tell people why you started a Triggered project. Like, why did you start that?
First, let me just say congratulations to you for 100,000 downloads. I think that's
Thank you.
absolutely amazing. And as a podcast person that's just starting out, I'm like, that's a lot.
Thank
What
you.
I'm saying? And as a sister doing things, talking about mental health, I mean, just big kudos to you. So let me just say that first and foremost. Let me just make sure I give that love, because that you cannot take that lightly. There's a lot of stuff that's on, a lot of content, and people have chosen to rock with you in the dreads. And
Thank you.
that's a big deal.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
But the whole thing with the Triggered project, I actually was involved in a movie called Red Monster, produced by Beyond the Measure Productions, and a friend of mine was the DP on it by the name of John Alawali Adekoche, who's phenomenal. And so he brought me in on this project, and they were working with a doctor who has been treating boys and men who are survivors. And so they were telling this story of this one gentleman who's looking back at his life and talking about what it's like to be a survivor, and then looking into the future, and it's the effects. And so I was able to be part of that project and actually play the abuser in that. So that was kind of a big deal. And so that really spoke to me to actually use my art in that way. But my wife, who's a social worker and a psychotherapist, we were always looking for ways to use art, sometimes a learning tool for social workers and things like that. And I said to her, hey, look, this project is something really cool. So then she was involved, and then we started to develop something else a little bit for the doctor for stage. And so we started working on this one-man show called Triggered Life. And so, but at some point, John Alawali Adekoche, who's also playwright, main writer on it, along with myself, asked me for my story, because we needed balance. We had this one story, this one character, and we needed balance. So he asked me, and he said, I need your story. I'd already been writing anyway, and so I said, okay. And that's how, and so we started to develop this one-man show, which one story is I'm telling mine, what it's like for me growing up. I'm also Bayesian and West Indian and stuff like that. So I talk about my family experience, what happened, and then, kind of looking to the future. And the other character has evolved even more, because now that character represents all the brothers that can't speak and haven't spoken. And also folks have started to disclose to me, and so we've added that to the show. The show is about an hour and a half long, and the part 2 is a talkback that is led by my wife, who's a psychotherapist. And so the whole experience is an hour and a half, and becomes a community discussion after that. And so it just continued to evolve. We did it in New York, off Broadway in New York. We did it at the Calderwood Pavilion in Boston, at the Huntington Space, and had over 250 people come out, which was amazing. And men were disclosing, and also people were finding therapists. It was just an amazing event. And at that point, I looked at what was happening, and I knew there was more to do. And so that's when I decided we're not going to be just the show. We're going to be the Triggered Project. The effect that it had with men disclosing, like, it just started to evolve. And so I decided, you know what, we're going to do we're going to make this the Triggered Project. We're going to have resources for folks who are looking for therapy. So we have that on the website. And then I got the idea about the podcast. I was already telling my story, but folks had been always asking my wife and myself about how we make it work. And they act like it's magic, and it's not. And I was like, look, we're already going to this. I'm already talking about my story. How powerful would it be for us to talk about how we deal with it? Being in a relationship, triggers, and sometimes you're like, why are you tripping? Like those are real moments, you know? And like,
Wait, when you say, you keep saying disclose, for people that aren't familiar with your story, what do you mean when you say like men have been able to disclose to you what's been happening?
Men have been able to tell me that they were sexually abused. They disclosed to me and let me know, you know, and oftentimes I'm the first person that they've told.
Dang.
I'm the only person in a lot of ways that they have told, that they have never talked about it ever. Once they heard I was doing this work and that I was sharing my story, or, you know, some people have come to the show and they've stood up and said, wow, I've been really moved by this. The fact that you're a Black man talking about what happened to you so openly, I can't do anything but want to heal. And they get up and they just start, you know, they start talking. And it's an amazing thing. I don't expect it to happen.
Yeah.
But, you know, I feel like we've been able to create a safe enough space, which is just amazing for people just to come up and want to talk and want to try to figure out their emotions, how they're feeling, and how that relates to them and their manhood.
What, you know, with you being so open about like your trauma and expressing your emotions, and especially as a Black man in America, why do you think that is such a struggle for, you know, Black and brown boys and men to be able to express how they're feeling and what they go through?
Well, it's what we're taught, right? I started to really think. The other thing as well is through all this and through my journey of healing, I've been afraid of success or afraid of taking the next step in terms of my career and things like that, because I was never really comfortable with myself. Right. And I got to a point where, and I was still working and being, you know, successful and things, but I got to a point where I was just unhealthy. Right. Some unhealthy people in my life. Like it was just, I just got to a point where I had to make a choice to do it for myself, but also for my relationship, for my wife, for my partner that stood by me. And I wanted to be a better man. I had to be a better husband. I had to be a better friend. And so I had to make that commitment to myself, to my relationship. And that really helped me make that decision. But to fully answer your question, the things that I was taught and things that were taught about being a man as young Black and brown boys is the same thing that's in our way of healing. Yeah. It's in our way. Boys don't cry, not being sensitive, therapies for white people, right? Which is the big one. I heard that. What boy you want to go where? What boy where you want to go? Oh no, that therapy is for white people, man. We don't do that. Like, you know what I mean? He said, oh look, he's sensitive. You know, sensitive. Not allowing boys to feel emotion. And all those things and those messages are hard to shake, right? We're not allowed to be as vulnerable as we can and deal with whatever we deal, cry, do whatever else, and move on. We're always taught to tuck that away. And there's not and it's also intergenerational as well, right? Because being silent, tucking away the emotion has always been our survival tactic. That's how we got through generations and things like that, right? So that has been passed. However, that doesn't work for everybody. And there's hasn't been enough of us being vulnerable. But the other thing is our parents protected us, right? But I'm not sure if they were protecting us from the truth or whether they were really protecting themselves for what they haven't had to deal with and what they had to tuck away to be able to keep going. You know what I mean? So it gets kind of muddy, but I think encouraging boys and even men to be vulnerable at times as young people, and getting to understand that that's being tough. Being tough is really having to deal with what you need to deal with it in your moment, and continue to keep moving. That's what toughness is about, but that's not what we learn.
Mm-hmm. Am I frozen on your end?
No.
I'm not. Okay, I can't. I'm frozen. You're frozen, but as long as you can see me, that's good. Thinking about everything that you just said, I'm wondering now, one of my jobs as a therapist, I talk to people and they talk about what they're going through. And being Black in America for men, from what I hear, has been a struggle because of how society has portrayed them. And I think about what's happening now. How important do you think it is for men to be able to express like the pain that they may be feeling from just kind of everything that's going on now?
I think it's incredibly important, right? I think that, and that's part of the vulnerable point. Being able to do that, also being in an environment that is conducive to make that happen. Because sometimes that's not the case. It's difficult sometimes. You're in a relationship and you're trying to be vulnerable and the other person's not supporting that. That's tough. That's really difficult to deal with, you know? And sometimes it's not about, oh, you just soft. But sometimes it's like, well, you hold me down. And if you're not strong right now, what that mean for me? Right? Because I expect you to be strong for me. So sometimes that's kind of what it is. But I think for us men, what we have to figure out is, and I know you know all about this because you're a therapist, is that we have to figure out what our wellness package looks like.
Yes.
What does it look like? You can't just say like, oh, you just need to go to therapy. No, there's a lot more things besides that. You need to have your faith in order, right? You need to have your health in order with your food that you put in your stomach and everything else, and your self-care, right? And your exercise and your meditation or whatever else you do, and doing things that you like. That's important.
Yeah.
Right? Like these are all the things that us as men need to figure that out. Put our ducks in a row. Put the structure in place that we need so we can figure out how to have outlets not all in one place. Because sometimes we just self-medicate, right? Sometimes we just self-medicate or we're only doing one thing. And we can't get it all out that way.
No, we can't.
We got to find different avenues to be able to put everything that we have to deal with, you know? Because walking down the street right now, it's real interesting. It's very interesting because the same people that would cross the street when they see me, that I see all the time, now I cross the street. Now I'm crossing the street now and trying to change what that dynamic is. And it's real interesting because they've had so much privilege and they've never experienced that, the backlash that comes back, wow, is almost worse than when they would see me and cross the street. You know what I mean? Like it is, you know, it's a lot, you know, a Black man wearing a mask. That's a lot. I've struggled with some health issues, shingles and some other stuff. So I was wearing a mask early, December. I think I had some early COVID and I was wearing early, and you could believe the looks that I was getting. My wife was like nervous, like, look, are you gonna go out and wear this mask? You know, and what people are gonna think and stuff. And I would have to comment to people and say, I'm sick. Would you rather me cough on you? And then they would back up, but they would look once, look twice. He's wearing a mask. What's he gonna do? You know, so it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing. But, you know, we also got to have dudes around that we can talk to as well. We can't have all the same people around us. And that's sometimes what we do. We have people that sometimes don't let us stretch and grow and have real conversations. We gotta diversify our friends. So we have folks that we can talk to,
Yep.
And then,
Yep.
You
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna try to stay right where you are. I'm gonna try to do something real quick, and I have another question for you. Hold on.
Okay.
Can you see me okay?
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay, that's fine. As long as you can see me, I can't see you. I don't know what's happening with my screen.
Really?
But I look fine and you look fine.
You look great. You look real radiant right now. I don't know if you put some coconut oil on or something. You radiant, girl.
Okay. All right. So that's fine. We're going to keep rocking out. Luckily, I've been doing this for 2 years, so I'm good. So one of the things you said is that we got to figure out what works for us. Like, what are we putting in our body? What are we doing to take care of ourselves? When it comes to men, and I love J. Cole, and there's a song that's called Lights Out. He talks about sex and how that really, it does something to whatever he's going through. Can you talk a little bit about the way that men have kind of grown up to think that's. So let me just stop and say this. There's nothing wrong with having sex, right? But I'm thinking about people who don't realize that they're utilizing that for a coping mechanism, or they're utilizing drinking for a coping mechanism. And I think it's been a part of our culture for a long time. And J. Cole talks about this a lot. Can you talk a little bit about how that can be harmful for the healing process if it's being overutilized?
Mm-hmm. Right. No, I understand. I think, first of all, I'm, being a survivor, things are a little different. Were a little different for me. And I was a little more shy and a little more reserved.
Yeah.
I understood that I was giving something up. That's kind of how I was. So, I was, like I said, I was pretty reserved, but I think that, it's interesting because us as males can't put our sexual frustration on our partners.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really difficult to learn. That's one thing we'll talk about on the podcast and things like that, is kind of how we deal with that, because that's really unfair when you really think about it. And it's like, well, you're supposed to take care of me. Or this is what's supposed to happen, right? 100%, and that's supposed to be the role of your partner, and that's almost impossible to fulfill.
Yeah,
in some way, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of frustration that can happen that way. So that was one thing that I had to really figure out. Okay, this is my thing that I have to deal with. I can't keep putting the pressure on her, because then how does that make her feel, and how's that going to trigger her, right? A lot of couples fight about that. A lot of couples fight about that dynamic because it becomes a power dynamic, right? Who has the power? And if you're worried about, fine, some people get that release, but how is that interaction happening?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You need to be paying attention to what's going on. Is this a mutual thing? Is it not? There's just a lot of factors to that. There's a lot of factors. But yes, we have been taught to, or we've seen sex and, alcohol and drugs is, an easy way for, us as Black folks to deal with things. Right? For a while, that's all we had. Right? Now,
that's true.
Right, that's all we had. Now, the mental health system, we know, is one, not geared towards us. Two, is not really geared and friendly towards men in general, never mind black men, right?
Yeah.
All the things that we don't trust the doctor, the police, the dentist, Jehovah's Witness coming to the door. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm gonna make a joke, I'm sorry. But like we're not anybody coming to our door and knocking on the door. We don't trust any of these people.
Right.
Right? So like that seems like that's not a choice in some ways. And so we fall, sometimes we fall into those, to some of those devices. And if everybody else is doing it, then we're gonna do it too. I'm not a person. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. You know what I mean? Like it just wasn't me. And so many people are so surprised. And my therapist was like, after I was telling him my story, was like, "You drink?" I was like, "No." "You smoke?" I was like, "No." He was like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Wow, it's so crazy that you've been through so much, but that wasn't a direction that you went in."
But I think that's because you were able to put your energy into your arts. And I think what I love about what you do is that I don't think people understand how powerful the arts is. And it's so wide range, and because like our society, America's society, doesn't put enough emphasis on the arts. It's not, it's harder. I think sometimes when people have this like passion, it's kind of harder to figure out which way they're going to go because it's no direct setup, right? You got to kind of figure it out. And I think now, like, you've been able to kind of like find your way and create these projects under your like triggered brand, right? And I think that's probably part of your healing. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I mean, the arts, the one thing I've been thankful that the arts have always been there for me, with singing and acting, dancing, like, all that type of stuff. It hasn't been therapy for me, but it's helped with the healing.
Nice.
And I think that's a big distinction. And I think that's why even for a while I had to stop. I was doing a lot of stage in Boston and things like that. And I stopped because the environment wasn't conducive to me. It just wasn't working because I wasn't healthy enough, and I couldn't use it as therapy. It just wasn't going to work. It just wasn't going to work for me. So I really took a lot of time off from doing, open calls and whatever. I was still working, but I had to go in a different direction because it wasn't what it needed to be. And I've been very lucky to be able to, like I said, doing a lot of projects with John Olawale at Decoje and independent projects, Confused by Love, Crosby Tatum, which is on Amazon Prime. And I've been able to really kind of pick and choose what I'm going to do. And that's the thing about finding this project. It's therapeutical. It's not therapy for me, but it's so helping my healing, being able to tell my story.
Yeah.
And the arts is a great way. Art's a great way to do it. And it just makes sense for me. I'm not sure if it makes sense for everybody, but it makes sense for me. And so when we thought about what the tagline was going to be and stuff like that, shattering the silence, nurturing the healing, that's with the use of art. So having the one-man show and the podcast, and there's a short movie that's coming, and I told you the sneaker documentary and stuff. Like, I'm trying to use, everything we can to spread this message of healing.
That's good. And speaking of you spreading the message of healing, one way people can tap into what you're doing immediately is through your podcast. I kind of want you to kind of set the stage for people that may not know what your podcast is going to be about and what they can expect from it, and where they can find it as well.
Okay, so Living a Triggered Life podcast, you can find this at our website, www.triggered1.com. We're also on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google, and also on Podbean. And the podcast is about myself and my wife. Me, I'm an actor. She is a psychotherapist. And we're talking about what it's like to be in a relationship, which with both of us having trauma histories, and how that affects our marriage and how it's affected our marriage and relationship. So we'll be talking about that. Like I said, you know, she can get activated and I get activated. Like, how do we deal with that? How do we talk about those things? We'll be processing things live as well. We're talking about love and relationships too. Y'all gonna hear about how we met, which is some craziness. And we're talking about mental health, and you know, we're also really just diving deep in how we feel about our love, how you can be in a relationship with history and be responsible for yourself. I'm responsible for my mental health, and so is my wife. And how we decided to be better for each other.
Nice.
With each of us taking responsibility for that, but also being invested in each other's mental health. I got a t-shirt that says, I'm invested in my bae's mental health, because I am.
Good.
And that's on our Triggered store and our website and stuff. But like that's important. So we're gonna jokes. There's a lot of jokes, of course, as well. And you know, because I'm pretty silly, but Roxanne is my wife, psychotherapist, social worker, is just brilliant with the things that she says. And she's from the Bronx in New York. She's a Black Puerto Rican from the Bronx in New York, and you know, I'm a Bayesian, so you know.
Well, I heard for people that are listening to this, so I heard the first episode, like I started off with, so amazing, because I have a trauma history, and I've been married for 12 years, and you know, it was hard. And one thing that you say about taking care of your mental health and about the triggers that happen, not because necessarily because of your partner, but just because like you haven't processed it. And so many relationships struggle because of that. And it doesn't have to be that way if we start to just recognize what's happening. So like this project is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's really difficult. I mean, it's difficult, even though you can say, okay, you kind of figure out what's going on. But like, if I say like I approach her in a certain way, even talking about like sex and whatever, and I come with all my energy, like, well, girl, you got to do this. This is gonna be. That's not gonna go well. That's not gonna go well, right? What you think gonna happen? Think you're gonna come up in here and what? Why not? Like I can come back. Like you naturally can come back at certain times, but then be like, oh no, wait a minute. Hold on a second. You know what? That's on me.
Yeah.
That's on me. Because you know what? I walked up in here with all that man energy. You know what I mean? And that wasn't going to work. And she could say, you know what? You're right. This is how it makes me feel.
Communication.
This is how I feel when it happens. And here's what you may have tried. It might not have worked, but at least I understand that. And it's not about me. It's not about her loving me or not loving me or anything like that. But because of the history, that she can be triggered like that, and I have, and just being aware of those things and just acknowledging her for all of her, I mean, can we actually really do that in relationships, which is really difficult to look at whoever we're dealing with and accept all of them truthfully. That's a real difficult thing. And can we accept ourselves for everything?
Yes. Yeah.
That's like, you start with self first, and can you do that? Then you can start to be in the, then you can start to try to do that. But it's a process, and it takes two people. And I think it also sometimes takes to break down like, well, men are kind of like, and females are like. I think some of that stuff doesn't help us.
It doesn't.
I just think it brings us, yes, there's some different ways of thinking in some ways, but like putting that aside that sometimes puts up a wall. I got to be honest. Sometimes that puts up a wall for us. It's a defense for us, I think, sometimes. Well, she was this way. Well, we got to think about why.
Yeah.
We got to think about why. And did we play a role in that? Right? Or if we didn't play a role in that, then what's going on that's making her or whoever you're dealing with like that?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, I mean, that's the thing about dealing with trauma and, you know, young boys, and why we want to, you know, have National Association of Black Social Workers with us, also do stuff for NASW and white clinicians and things like that, because when they're seeing these aggressive behaviors from our boys and our men, we want them, yes, to be trauma informed and ask the question, which nobody does, right? Nobody really asks the question they're supposed to, but we want them to take that second glance. So when this kid is throwing a chair, right, they're not just kicking them out of the classroom and suspending them and all the rest of that, and no one's really really making the connection with the child or whomever to have that conversation, right? Yeah. And if I can't find it, I'm trying to find somebody else who has the connections to have that conversation to why are you doing that? Not just, yes, what happened to you? What's making you do this, right? But why are you doing it? And why do you feel you needing to do this, right? But also making them aware of the behavior as well. Do you realize right now that what your face looks like? Do you realize right now what your body language is saying right now? I don't know if that's what your intent is, but this is what it is saying, right? Because aggressive men show up all the time. Men and boys show up all the time at providers, and they don't know how to deal with us. That's the reason why we're doing this as well. If I'm mad and I'm angry, and these brothers right now are mad and angry, and they're going to try to get some help, and they got someone that doesn't look like them, they are afraid. Right off the bat, person's like, I'm threatened. Right? I'm threatened. But we can't let our emotions do what it needs to do. Sometimes it's going to be loud. Sometimes that's how it's going to come out. Right? We don't get any room for that. So us trying to work with providers and folks that are not of color, we're trying to make it so people are prepared for that. Don't just go off the stereotypes and everything else. Don't write an email today, say you down in the whole nine and all that, when you've had a long time to be able to make a difference within yourself and your choices and how you deal with folks of color. I mean, it's just that simple. You know, the privilege is so crazy that people have the ability to today say, you know what? Today's the day, and forget about everything else that happened before.
No, that's really good. And I think that I've witnessed a lot of what you're talking about around kids, especially boys, and the aggression, and you know, my white counterparts not knowing how to deal with them. Everything is just hospitalization, right? And I've noticed the difference, like with my own eyes. It's, if I didn't work at the hospital and seen it, like, I don't know, like if I would have known how deep the system was when it comes to the difference in the way that they look at the young Black boys and the young white boys who will exhibit the same behavior, but there's more compassion given to the young white boys, and how like the system kind of starts off setting them up to fail from the beginning. So I think like what you're doing, and the advocacy and the knowledge that you're bringing out there is really going to help a lot of people have a better understanding on how to deal with like what's happening. Yes, and the medication is huge. That's the one thing. And a lot of our people are not informed. It's more like, okay, well, this is what the doctor says I should do, then I guess I should do it. and not looking at other options. And you know, that really just, it really bothers me, you know, because these are people that look like me, and I'm one person, and I'm like, I'm working a shift. Think about the other shifts that I wasn't there for, and how many people were just sent to the hospital and medicated. And so I'm just like grateful that you're sharing your story and like talking about this stuff so transparent, because now when I would go to the hospital and somebody sees me that looks like me, they're more open to talk to me about what's happening, right? Because it's me, and I get it, right? And so like having a male like share like their trauma and share, you know, what will help and not help, I think it's just going to help so many people, which it sounds like you found doing this work.
Yeah, I mean that's you know, that's the reason why we want to do it. I want to be able to, you know, help people. You know, that's a big thing. I know what it's like. I was silenced for I was just silenced for so long that now that I have and I'm continuing to be on my journey. I'm not done yet by no means, but I think once I kind of found my niche with how to talk about it, you know, it's just been amazing with the people that have felt that they were helped by listening to the podcast and things like that. Yeah, and I have a background working with children and young people and things like that. So that's why I kind of spoke to that. I know someone had asked a question about, you know, about setting Black boys up for failure, you know, and I know you can definitely speak to that for sure. But I think one, it's crazy because boys sometimes aren't in the lot. And I'm sorry. So from what I've seen, a lot of times either folks will baby the boys in a lot of ways, or baby sometimes the Black and brown boys, and not necessarily hold them accountable or get them to understand that there's a high standard for them in general, like every other child. Sometimes what happens is that the standard becomes low, and kids get rewarded sometimes for acting out, right? And then they manipulate that. You know, we talk about that in the podcast about triggered is a buzzword, and the kids have picked up on it. Yo, the way you talk to me right now, yo, you got me bad triggered. I'm gonna talk to the nurse. I need to get out of class. Like people are manipulating now because they know what to do when they have people around them who are not fully invested, who their own issues are in the way. And that's the biggest thing a lot of times. That's a hard thing for folks who, as teachers and educators, because sometimes our business is in the way, and it's about what we think needs to be done and not what needs to be done, right? Which is to be consistent, create relationships as best we can, right? Let folks know that there's a high standard for them and stick to that, right? Teach them how to deal with emotions and things like that. Like that's part of setting folks up to what should happen. Make people make them communicate, like all this stuff. But it gets difficult when there's one teacher to 40 kids. That is really, really difficult. That's a hard thing to be able to get to every child. So that is one thing, because I give it up to teachers a lot. You know, I'm a teaching artist for the Huntington Theater Company for the August Wilson Monologue Competition, and I was rocking with 25 to 30, and it is, you know, it's a dance for sure. So I don't want to, you know, like I don't want to get down on the teachers because they do such a great job and don't get appreciated for everything they do. But they're being asked to be a therapist, to be a social worker, and everything else at the same time. So it's really, it's a tough balance. Not paid enough, not supported enough around the, you know, the culture in school. You know, more nurturing culture in general around learning is also important. So A lot of people are doing the best they can, but some people are making choices.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I'll just, everything you said is true. And I'll just also add, I think that people, you know, there's a mark, something happens in school, this stuff carries on with them. I think that young Black boys are labeled differently, and that label passes on to the next school or to the next program. And so now it's not just Keith who's trying to have a fresh start. It's Keith, the aggressor, Keith, so anytime something happens, you know, he's already been labeled. And so what happens with young Black boys is they carry this label with them. And this is who I am. Like, they could be, I've been a therapist for a long time, and I've met some amazing people who unfortunately ended up in the system and are brilliant people. But their brilliance, and sometimes people were just so smart. They were finishing before people, they were bored, and they would get in trouble instead of thinking like, let me try to give them some more work. There's so many nuances to how Black boys are treated from the beginning, and the system doesn't help it because they're labeled, and they take that label and then they end up in these like programs where other kids who may have more problems, and now they adapt to that environment that they're in. Right. It's major, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, little Black boys aren't looked at as little Black boys. And you see it, you know, across the country with, you know, how the system responds to them. And it's hard to see, you know, when you have like little Black boys and you have like family, like this is your people, and you know, like they're just little Black boys, and to know like the system is not like set up for them to succeed, and it sucks. You know, it just sucks. So
no, I agree with the labeling, and that's one thing. You know, when I go into the classroom for the Huntington and things like that, you know, the teachers tell me what they want to tell me, right? About each child and things like that. I try to have a one-on-one and have a conversation, and I tell them exactly what I heard.
Oh yeah,
exactly what I heard.
Good.
And then I try to assess the situation, right? And be like, okay, so, all right, so you're really bored, right? You're acting out and stuff because your mind works really fast. Yes, it's part of your anxiety, but your mind works really fast. And so you have nothing else to do, so you're acting up. Like, so you're bored? Really, that's it? Like, if they take the A, why are you getting a C and a D because you're playing around? Take the A and keep it moving. Find out how you work best and be the best at it. Because right now, they're labeling you as A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. But I come and look at you and have and talk to you, and I can see who you are. I see who you are. And that's what you're talking about with the labeling, is that people see the label and not the child and not the man, right? And that's what happens to us as Black men. The label, over-sexualized, the brute, and everything else that's being put out there, that's what people see, and they don't see us as human beings and men and strong boys and kings that we are.
And then you don't see it because you've been labeled, and so now this is just who I am, right? I'm just gonna be nobody. I grew up in the hood. I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, well, the system wasn't set up for me anyway, so it doesn't matter. You know, so it's hard because if you're surrounded in an environment where the system sets you up to fail, why wouldn't you take on that environment? It's actually harder to fight against the environment than it is just to give up and just say, you know what, I'll just be miserable.
We all have choices, right? And even people talk about racism and all kind of stuff. We all have choices. We were all taught things. We all learned. Since we came out the womb, information has been given to us, right? Yeah. But nobody ever says to us, at a certain point, as you have to decide what type of adult you're going to be. Right? We all have that decision to make. We can either go along with things how they've always been, or we can, decide to do some different things.
Yeah.
That also depends on the different, the different people that you're around and stuff like that. But we have a choice. Everybody has a choice to make with what type of person they were going to be. I was blessed with the knowledge and the things that I learned as a young Bayesian boy, right? No question about it. But at some point, I had to figure out what type of man I was going to be. And some things were going to be a little different than what I was taught. But it was my choice. And people forget that at some point, they have a choice with what direction they're going to go in. You know what I mean? And sometimes you're pushed in some directions.
Yeah, I know.
And so sometimes, it's kind of a duality thing. Yes, we have choices with how we think, but sometimes we are pushed in a direction sometimes that we don't feel like we have a choice in. And sometimes we don't in that way. But I'm talking about how we think, our mind. That's where our choice is.
Amen.
And I think that's where we sometimes lose our power. We have so much power in terms of it, right?
Yeah.
You saw the woman, case in point, you saw the woman in Central Park, right? That was a choice. Didn't make a difference if she was a Democrat or whatever, or the woman next door that says hello to you every single day. When push came to shove, she made a choice with what she was going to do in that moment. They may not define her for the rest of her life, but in that moment, she made a clear choice. And you could see that choice that she made. Got her voice all high and the whole nine, right? And she taught that. She was taught that. But she decided to make the choice to use what she was taught.
Yeah.
And that both ways does not get talked about.
No, that's good. That's good. And basically shifting the way you think. I love that we're like ending on this point of the choices, because even though everything me and Keith just talked about is true, about the systems, it's good to educate yourself around like what's happening, how it's happening, taking care of yourself. What does a triggered life mean? But then yes, that's true, right? It's true. But what's also true is that we have a choice. And I never want people to forget that. As long as you're still breathing, there's room for change. You don't have to do or be who they say you are. You got to know who you are. That's so good.
Right. And we have to, you know what? And it's a journey. I'm still on mine. I'm talking today, but I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing what I've learned, and I'm trying to integrate.
Yeah.
Trying to integrate. So, I think that's just incredibly important. But I'm not speaking from no pedestal by no means.
And that's why, and of course you're not, because your podcast is called Living a Triggered Life, which lets me know that you're going to get triggered. Even if you're on your healing journey, triggers are going to come up. Your experiences are a part of who you are. You can't run away from your mind. So it's how do I deal with this life? And that's what you're going to learn on the podcast from Keith and Roxanne.
Yeah.
Tell people how they can reach you, Keith. I appreciate this conversation.
Thank you. Yes.
This was really good and so needed. And your transparency is just so amazing. I right before we got on, I said to him, when's the next one coming out? So he said the end of June. So I feel like a fiend waiting, because I love stuff like this. But tell people how they can reach you besides the podcast, because we know how to find the podcast.
You can find the Living a Triggered Life podcast. You can find us on our website, www.triggered1.com, Podbean. You can find us Apple Podcasts, Google, iHeartRadio. You can find me on Instagram at Keith Mascolll. Facebook is at Keith Mascolll. Really simple. Those are the best ways. Those are the best ways to get at me. Actually, follow us on Instagram, The Triggered Project, Triggered _ONE_. We're trying to get our presence up. So follow us there. Follow the podcast, which is just at Living a Triggered Life Podcast. Really, really simple. And of course, on IG, you can follow me at Keith Mascolll. And also Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Keith Mascolll. Yep, I had to, you know, I know you look at Celeste like, dang, how many you got? I mean, but with the, with the project, you know, each with the project, it's kind of its own entity under the umbrella. So
no, I get it. I do my research, so I already understand what's happening. But you know, for people listening to this on the podcast, I want them to hear it, and also I'll put it in the show notes for you guys. So, Mr. Mascoll, thank you. You are amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. I love your energy. I love everything that you're doing.
Thank you. This feels really good for me. Like I said, I've been recovering from complications from shingles in the last 3 years, and so it's been really tough for me in terms of my energy and things like that, and my personality is starting to come back. So, you know, one thing I like reflecting, like making jokes and things like that. Like, this is like the first time, I have to be honest, that I feel a little bit more like myself.
Wow.
Because I really haven't. I've been really subdued and things like that, just because you know, I was in pain and things like that. So this is a blessing. It's a blessing.
Wow, that's so good. That makes me so happy.
And it's a blessing to talk to you, and you know, I'll talk to you anytime. So we're gonna have you on the podcast too, for sure.
Whoop, whoop. I can't wait. I'm a fan, so I can't wait.
We'll have you on the podcast, and maybe, you know, maybe your partner or whatever too. Maybe we'll do something like that.
Yeah, that's dope. All right, I'm down, Keith. I got you, homie. All right, have a good night.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on. This is great.
All right, bye.
Bye.
That was amazing. So if you have never been in here before, I this is what I do. I kind of talk to people and they share their story. The crazy part is that Keith actually scheduled this a while ago, and it felt so timely with everything going on around the world. I meant to say that while he was on, but with everything going on around the world, it felt like perfect time. You know, just the name of his project and how so many people don't even recognize that they are living a triggered life, and like, how do I cope and deal with it? So that was amazing. So I'm grateful to him. Thank you guys for coming on, rocking with me. Tomorrow, it'll just be me. I'll be answering your questions about mental health. And, you know, talking about things that can help us kind of get through the moments in the day. Yes, I agree, Todd. So I'll be doing that on tomorrow. Thursday, we will have a meditation session. I have somebody coming on who's going to lead us through meditation and peace, because I think that's needed. And then you're welcome. You're welcome, Donald. And then Friday is my Zoom party. So Friday we're going to be celebrating me reaching 100,000 downloads. So that's exciting. And so that's our week, right? Tomorrow I'm talking about mental health, which I always do. Thursday we're going to be doing meditation. And then Friday won't be this podcast, but at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be on Zoom and we'll be celebrating this journey, because it's been a journey. People like Todd on Periscope, like my Periscope family, kind of been rocking with me for a while. So, you know, I started just kind of coming on social media to talk about mental health, and then, you know, decided 2 years in, like, oh, I want to create this podcast. And so this podcast started with me not knowing, you know, what it would look like or how would it be received. And it's been received really well. So I could not have done it without like all of you who consistently support me. So I'm beyond grateful. All right, so we're gonna go. Love you guys. This was a longer podcast because, you know, I really wanted to have this conversation and it's so needed. So I'll see you guys tomorrow, and y'all know I love y'all. Talk to you later. Bye.
Every laugh, every smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity, and make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste, the therapist. Let's go.